On the distant planet Vorkath, amidst the chaos of an alien war, one human soldier stood alone. He had been sent to defend a critical supply post, a small but vital location that controlled the flow of resources to human colonies scattered across the galaxy. The odds were heavily stacked against him. Alien forces, far more advanced and numerous, had surrounded the area, determined to seize control of this strategic point. The human soldiers had long since retreated, leaving only this one man, standing his ground with nothing but his courage and his combat suit. His name was Captain Marcus Drake, and though he had been fighting for years against overwhelming odds, this battle would be different. He could feel it in his bones. The sound of enemy footsteps echoed through the thick alien soil beneath him. The alien forces, a brutal and ruthless species known as the Zorath, were known for their advanced weapons, their terrifying warriors, and their cold, calculated strategy. But Marcus had something they didn't: the will to fight, no matter the odds. The Zorath army, led by General Korath, was closing in, their heavy boots thundering through the canyon. Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no backup. No reinforcements were on the way. The Zorath were relentless, and they didn't stop until they had claimed what they wanted. But Marcus knew this. He wasn't going down without a fight. He took a deep breath, steadying his hands. His combat suit, though strong, wasn't indestructible. It had seen better days, scratched, dented, and covered in the dust of countless battles. But it was all he had. He activated his visor, scanning the terrain for any sign of the approaching enemy. The Zorath were smart, and they would be looking for weaknesses. He had to stay hidden, stay sharp, and wait for the right moment. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of alien vegetation. The air was thick with tension. Marcus crouched low, his boots barely making a sound as he moved into position. He knew the enemy would approach from the bridge above, hoping to take him out from a distance. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. But Marcus had a different plan. As the Zorath forces came into view, he waited. The silence between them was thick with anticipation. Marcus was calm, focused. He had learned over the years that in moments like these, it wasn't about strength or size. It was about patience. He had to wait for them to make the first move. And they did. As the lead Zorath soldier crested the ridge, Marcus raised his rifle, his targeting system locking onto the enemy. A single shot rang out, and the first alien soldier fell. The others scattered, taking cover behind rocks and boulders. But it was too late. Marcus had already calculated their moves, and he was ready. The fight that followed was like something out of a nightmare for the Zorath. One by one they fell, unable to anticipate the human soldier's tactics. His shots were precise, hitting vital points that sent their armor sparking and their warriors crashing to the ground. The Zorath were strong, yes, but they weren't used to fighting someone who refused to be intimidated. And Marcus wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far greater. He was fighting for humanity's place in the universe. The Zorath general, Korath, watched the battle unfold from a distance, his eyes narrowing with disbelief. He had heard the reports. Human soldiers were weak, inefficient, and easily defeated. But what he saw before him was not the human soldiers he had heard about. This soldier was different. He was a force to be reckoned with. The general's mind raced, trying to understand how one human could hold his ground against an entire army. Korath wasn't one to make rash decisions, but this human's display of skill and courage was something he had never seen before. He issued orders to his troops to step up their efforts, but deep down, he was starting to question everything he had been taught about humans. How could one man fight so fiercely, with so much passion and resolve? As the battle raged on, Marcus didn't let up. Darted between rocks, using the terrain to his advantage. His rifle's energy blasts tore through the air, striking down alien soldiers with precision. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had made a promise to his people that he would never surrender, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. His mind flashed back to the faces of those he was fighting for, the innocent people who relied on the resources that this post provided. He thought of his comrades, of the sacrifices they had made, and of the family he had left behind. All of them depended on him now. He couldn't let them down. The Zorath soldiers, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, were now starting to falter. They were accustomed to crushing their enemies with sheer force, but Marcus was proving to be an entirely different challenge. With every soldier that fell, they became more uncertain. Their commander, Korath, could see the fear beginning to creep into their ranks. And then, as if to underscore Marcus's defiance, the sky above Vorkath began to rumble. The sound of distant engines grew louder, and a massive ship descended from the clouds. It was the flagship of the Zorath fleet, and it hovered ominously above the battlefield. The alien Empress had arrived. From the deck of the ship, the Empress looked down at the chaos below. Her expression was cold, but there was something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or even admiration. He had studied their tactics and knew exactly how they would strike next. They were methodical, but they were also predictable. Just as Marcus anticipated, a group of Zorath soldiers emerged from the ridge, advancing with careful precision. They were armed with plasma rifles, their glowing red sights scanning the area. Marcus held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment. When one of the soldiers stepped too far forward, Marcus fired. The blast tore through the air, striking the alien soldier directly in the chest. The force of the shot sent him tumbling backward, a stunned expression frozen on his face. The remaining soldiers scattered, taking cover behind rocks and debris. But Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, his steps calculated and precise, darting from one cover to the next. The rifle in his hands became an extension of himself, each shot fired with deadly accuracy. Another Zorath soldier fell, followed by another, as Marcus pushed them back with relentless force. He was a blur of motion, his every movement calculated and purposeful. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He had fought in countless battles, faced impossible odds time and time again, but this was different. This battle against the Zorath was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. A fight that could prove that humans were not to be underestimated. From above, the Zorath fleet observed the battle with growing concern. The Empress, standing on the observation deck of her flagship, had watched as the human soldier continued to defy the overwhelming odds. Her eyes narrowed, intrigued by what she saw. This human was different from the others. He fought with a passion and a skill that was beyond anything she had ever expected. Every movement, every shot, was executed with the precision of a seasoned warrior. The Empress had long believed that the human race was primitive and incapable of standing up to the might of the galactic powers. She had seen countless species fall before her forces, their resistance nothing more than a fleeting moment before they were crushed. But this human soldier was different. He was refusing to bow, refusing to break, no matter how many times the Zorath attacked. It was a spectacle unlike any the Empress had ever witnessed, and she found herself fascinated by it. Down on the battlefield, Marcus was in the thick of the fight. The Zorath soldiers had regrouped, their numbers overwhelming, but Marcus showed no sign of slowing down. He knew he was outnumbered, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was still standing, still fighting. His mind raced as he considered his next move. The Zorath were trying to surround him, cutting off his escape routes, but Marcus had anticipated this. He knew their tactics, and he was ready. A loud explosion rang out, shaking the ground beneath him. The Zorath had launched a mortar strike, hoping to force him into the open. Marcus gritted his teeth and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. He had to keep moving. He had to stay unpredictable. The Zorath were powerful, but they were slow. He had speed, and he would use it to his advantage. As the Zorath forces closed in, Marcus found himself surrounded on all sides. He was out of ammunition in his rifle, but he didn't panic. Instead, he pulled a combat knife from his belt and sprinted toward the nearest enemy soldier. With a quick swipe, the blade cut through the Zorath's armor, sending the soldier stumbling back in pain. Marcus didn't stop. He moved from one soldier to the next, using his knife with deadly precision, each strike faster than the last. The Zorath soldiers, who had once been confident in their superiority, were beginning to falter. The humans' resilience was starting to take its toll on them. They had expected an easy victory, but what they had found instead was an unyielding force that refused to be crushed. One by one, the Zorath soldiers fell, unable to match Marcus's speed and skill. The sound of their retreating footsteps filled the air as they began to pull back, regrouping to plan their next move. Marcus stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily, his body covered in dirt and blood. His muscles ached, and his head throbbed, but he was still standing. His heart pounded in his chest, a fierce reminder that he was still alive. His eyes scanned the horizon, watching for any signs of movement from the Zorath forces. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since it had begun, he allowed himself a brief moment of triumph. He had done it. He had held them off. The Zorath general, Korath, stood in disbelief as he watched the retreat of his soldiers. His eyes were filled with frustration, but there was also something else. Fear. This human soldier had done what no one had expected. He had single-handedly stopped the Zorath assault, and now they were retreating. The general's mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. How could one human do this? It didn't make sense. The Zorath were supposed to be the superior force, yet this human had defied everything they believed in. Korath turned to the Empress, who had remained silent throughout the battle. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or even respect. She watched Marcus carefully, her mind turning over the possibilities. The human had shown incredible resilience. But was that enough? Was this the future of humanity, or just the actions of one extraordinary individual? As the Empress watched the soldier from her command ship, she began to feel a sense of unease. For the first time, she began to question everything she had known about humanity. She had thought them weak, incapable of standing against the might of the galaxy's most powerful forces. But now, as she observed this human's display of strength, she realized that perhaps humanity was more than just a footnote in the galactic history. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. As the Zorath forces regrouped, pulling back into their formation, Captain Marcus Drake stood still on the battlefield, taking slow, measured breaths. The battle had been brutal, and though his body screamed in pain, he remained standing. He had survived the most intense wave of assault yet, but the true test was yet to come. Above him, the skies were shifting, darkening, as a large shadow loomed. The Zorath fleet had retreated, but something more dangerous was approaching. The Empress's flagship. The massive ship, which seemed to blot out the stars as it descended, was a symbol of the Zorath Empire's power. It was a symbol of the overwhelming might that had crushed countless civilizations before it. But as it hovered above, casting its dark shadow across the battlefield, Marcus didn't flinch. He knew this was a pivotal moment. He was about to face the ruler of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and he was still alone. He adjusted his combat suit, the many dents and marks from the fierce battle all around him. The dirt and blood that had stained his uniform over the course of this fight were reminders of his survival. He had kept going, refusing to stop, no matter how many times the Zorath had struck. And now, the Empress would see for herself why humanity was not to be underestimated. The ship's engines roared as it hovered over him, the immense pressure of its descent pushing the air down with a force that kicked up dust and debris. It was then that Marcus saw her, the Empress. She stood on the observation deck of the ship, her dark eyes focused on him. Her gaze was cold, calculating, but there was something else there, a glimmer of intrigue. She had been watching his battle from afar, and now she wanted to see this human for herself. Her presence alone was enough to cause the Zorath soldiers around her to straighten up, their eyes filled with reverence. To them, the Empress was the embodiment of their power. But Marcus didn't bow. He stood tall, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment felt endless, the air thick with tension. Here he was, a single human, standing before the ruler of a galactic empire. And yet, in this moment, he felt no fear. All he had was his unwavering resolve, the knowledge that he had fought for something far greater than himself, for humanity. As the ship landed softly on the ground, the Zorath soldiers moved to form a protective circle around their Empress, their weapons at the ready. They had no idea what to expect from this human. Some were nervous, others were confident that the Empress's mere presence would be enough to crush him. But none of them knew the human spirit, and they certainly didn't understand what Marcus had just done. They had seen strength before, physical might, advanced technology, strategic genius, but they hadn't seen what Marcus had shown them. He had fought with something that no army, no fleet, and no weapon could ever truly match: determination. The Empress stepped down from her ship, her steps light, almost graceful, despite the immense weight of her command. Her presence radiated authority, yet her eyes held a flicker of curiosity. She had witnessed warriors fall, empires crumble, and civilizations be wiped from the face of the universe. But this human, this single soldier, had managed to defy the odds in a way she had never anticipated. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: respect. "You're still standing," the Empress said, her voice calm but laced with an undeniable edge of admiration. Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm not done yet." The Zorath soldiers, standing behind their leader, exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard the reports. They had witnessed his actions. But now, face to face with this human, they couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. They had expected to crush him with ease. But instead, they were witnessing something else entirely: a human whose spirit had not only survived their assault, but had fought back with unmatched resilience. The Empress stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she observed Marcus. "You fight with the strength of 1,000 warriors," she remarked, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "But why? What is it that drives you? What is it that makes you so unwilling to fall?" Marcus paused, his gaze unwavering as he met her eyes. There was no fear in his expression, no sign of hesitation. "I fight because I have something worth protecting," he said simply. "My people, my home." "That's why I fight." The Empress tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. She had heard of human survival instincts, of their ability to cling to life even in the most dire of circumstances. But this was something more. This human had done more than just fight for survival. He had fought for a cause, for something greater than himself. "And do you truly believe your kind can stand against the might of the Zorath?" the Empress asked, her tone shifting from curiosity to something more dangerous, more calculating. "Do you believe you can stop us from conquering the galaxy?" Marcus met her gaze firmly. "I don't know if we can stop you, but I know we won't go down without a fight." The Empress regarded him for a long moment, her cold expression betraying no emotion. But deep down, she was starting to see something that hadn't existed in the Zorath Empire's worldview. A human who would not bend, not break, and not yield. A human who fought not just for survival, but for something far greater, a desire to protect what mattered most. Her mind raced as she considered the possibilities. For centuries, the Zorath had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, sweeping through star systems, conquering worlds, and subjugating civilizations. They had never encountered a species like humanity before. Humans were small, fragile, and technologically inferior, but they had something no other species seemed to have: an unyielding spirit, a fire that could not be extinguished. For the first time, the Empress felt a sense of uncertainty. She had built her empire on strength and fear, but now, facing this human soldier, she wondered if there was something more to power. Was it enough to crush civilizations with sheer force, Or was there something more? Something the Zorath had overlooked. "Tell me," the Empress said, her voice softening. "How can one human stand against the might of the galaxy?" Marcus stood tall, his voice steady and firm. "Because we don't fight alone. We fight together. And as long as there's one of us left, we'll keep fighting." The Empress studied him for a moment longer, her cold eyes assessing every word, every action. She had encountered countless species over the centuries, but none had spoken with the same conviction as this human. None had stood before her with such confidence in their cause. And despite her immense power, she couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for this soldier, this man who refused to bow, who refused to break. After a long silence, the Empress spoke again. "You are unlike any other human I have encountered," she said, her voice low and almost thoughtful. "But there is one thing you must understand. The Zorath Empire does not tolerate defiance." Marcus squared his shoulders, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then you'll have to kill me to stop me." The Empress's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. For a moment, she said nothing, but then her voice was calm, almost reflective. "Perhaps we will, but not today." Marcus raised an eyebrow, confused but wary. "What do you mean?" "I will offer you a choice," she said. "Join us. Fight for the Zorath Empire. Become one of us, and I will ensure your place among the stars." "You will lead the humans into the future, side by side with the Zorath." Marcus stood firm, the weight of her offer hanging in the air. He knew what the Zorath had done to countless worlds. He knew what they were capable of, and he knew that this was not a choice he could make lightly. The Empress was offering him power, a future of unimaginable control and influence. But at what cost? "No," he said simply, his voice unwavering. "I fight for my people, not for you." The Empress studied him, her expression unreadable. She had seen many warriors, many conquerors, but this human, this single soldier, had challenged everything she had ever known about strength. "For now," she said softly, her tone almost approving, "your choice will remain your own." And with that, the Empress turned away, signaling her retreat. She would not destroy him. Not yet. She wanted to see what more this human could do. She wanted to see just how far his spirit could take him. As her ship lifted into the sky, Marcus stood alone on the battlefield, his heart still pounding in his chest. The battle was far from over, but in this moment he had won something far more important than any victory on the battlefield. He had shown the Zorath Empire that humanity would not be so easily defeated, and that, he thought with quiet pride, was just the beginning. The dust still lingered in the air, swirling around the rocky battlefield as Marcus Drake watched the Zorath ship disappear into the sky. The moment was tense, heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. The fight had been long, but now the true battle had begun. Marcus knew it wasn't over. Far from it, but for the first time in the last few hours he felt something like relief. The Empress had offered him a choice, and he had refused her. It had been a hard decision, but in his heart he knew it was the only one he could make. Joining the Zorath was never an option. It wasn't just about survival. It was about humanity's right to stand on its own, to fight for what was theirs, to fight for the future. If the Empress had been testing him, she had learned something valuable. Humans didn't just survive. They fought to the end, even when the odds were against them. They didn't give in, not to fear, not to power, and not to oppression. Marcus walked slowly, carefully, over the rocky terrain, his mind racing. The battlefield around him was quiet now, the echoes of the battle fading away. The Zorath had retreated, but he knew they would return. They wouldn't just let a human soldier stand in their way. The Zorath were relentless, but they had also learned something important. Humanity was far stronger than they had thought. That knowledge, Marcus knew, would be their greatest weapon. He reached the edge of the battlefield where his small makeshift camp lay. His rifle, a few supplies, and a broken communications device were all he had left. The rest of his team was gone, lost in the chaos of the battle. He had fought alone, and he had won. But at what cost? The Zorath were a powerful enemy, and they wouldn't stop until they had conquered everything. But now he had a glimmer of hope. If he could stand against their empire, so could others. Humanity wasn't alone in this fight. There were other worlds, other species, and maybe, just maybe, they could unite to stop the Zorath. But first, he needed to survive long enough to make that happen. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing mind. He had to focus. His people were counting on him. He had promised to keep fighting, and that promise was still unbroken. As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting a red glow over the landscape, Marcus heard the distant hum of engines. He tensed, instinctively reaching for his rifle, but then he realized it wasn't the Zorath. The sound grew louder, and soon a small shuttle appeared in the sky, descending toward him. It was a human ship, a rescue team. His heart surged with relief. He wasn't alone anymore. The shuttle landed with a soft thud, and the hatch opened. A group of human soldiers stepped out, their faces familiar. They were his comrades, survivors of previous battles, and now they had come to bring him home.
"Captain Drake," one of them called out, his voice filled with admiration.
"We thought you were dead. How did you—"
"I'm still here," Marcus replied with a faint smile. "And I'm not done yet." The soldiers moved quickly, helping him gather his gear and preparing to leave the battlefield behind. But Marcus's thoughts were still with the Zorath.
The Empress's words echoed in his mind. "Join us. Fight for the Zorath Empire." What would it mean if humanity had to fight the Zorath on their own? What if they couldn't unite, couldn't stand against the Empire? The Empress had offered him power, a future among the stars. She had made it clear that she didn't want to destroy him, but she had also made it clear that the Zorath would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. The choice had been his. But what if that choice had consequences?
"Where to now, sir?"
another soldier asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Marcus paused for a moment, looking up at the shuttle's controls. His mind was still racing, but he knew what needed to be done. They had to go back to Earth, back to their people. They needed to prepare, to strategize, to form alliances with any species that would stand with humanity. The Zorath might be a powerful enemy, but they were not invincible, and they would learn that in time.
"We go back to Earth," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We regroup. We get ready for what's coming next." The shuttle's engines roared to life as the soldiers secured the last of their gear.
The hatch closed, and the ship ascended into the sky, leaving the battlefield below. As the shuttle soared through the atmosphere, Marcus looked out of the small viewport, watching the planet below shrink into the distance. Earth was a world of blue oceans, green forests, and bustling cities. But soon, it might be in danger. The Zorath Empire wasn't going to stop, not until they had conquered everything. But Marcus had something that the Zorath didn't. He had hope, and he wasn't about to let that hope die. The journey back to Earth was long, and Marcus spent most of it in quiet contemplation. His mind kept drifting back to the Empress's offer, to her words. There was something about her, something that made him wonder. She had seen his strength, his refusal to back down. She had seen humanity's potential, and in a way, she respected it. But would that respect be enough to change the course of the war? Or would the Zorath continue their conquest, crushing humanity underfoot? Marcus didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't fight this war alone. The Empress had given him a glimpse into the power of the Zorath, and he couldn't ignore the reality of their might. But he also knew that humanity had something else, something the Zorath didn't have. They had each other. They had the will to fight, the unity that came from being a species with everything to lose. And as long as humanity could hold on to that unity, they would have a chance. The shuttle landed smoothly on the surface of Earth, and Marcus stepped out, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of home. It had been too long since he had seen the people he cared about, and he knew there was much to do, but the war wasn't over, and the Empress wasn't going to forget about him. He was about to turn toward the command center when a voice called out to him, "Captain Drake." He turned to see a familiar face, one of the commanders from Earth's military. The man's face was serious, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes.
"Good to see you alive, son," the commander said, clasping Marcus's shoulder. "We've been tracking the Zorath movements."
"We've got work to do." Marcus nodded, his gaze steely.
"I know.
The Zorath are not going to stop, but neither are we. They'll learn that humanity will never kneel." The commander smiled, his expression filled with determination. "Whoa!" Marcus stood on the balcony overlooking the military base, the cool wind brushing against his face. The planet was calm, but he knew the storm was coming. The Zorath Empire wouldn't let a small human victory stand. They would strike again. But this time, humanity would be ready. The Empress had given him a choice, and he had chosen to stand firm. He had refused her offer of power, choosing instead to fight for something greater. Freedom, unity, and the future of his people. He didn't know what the next battle would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. Humanity would never give up. The Zorath could have their empire, their armies, and their ships, but they would never have the human spirit. And that, Marcus thought, was the greatest weapon of all.
As the sun set on Earth, Marcus looked toward the horizon, his mind set on the future. The war was far from over, but humanity had made its stand. And as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would continue to fight for humanity's future.